Hey college football fans, welcome back to another episode of Walk It Off with Chappy. This is episode 56 and was on a little bit of a family vacation last week. Went down to ACC SEC country after previewing those Power 5 conferences, and now we're getting into the Group of 5 conferences, starting off with the AAC. And on my vacation, yes, I could not take myself away from college football. It's embedded in me. I was looking at some of the storylines and some of the notes from the AAC Media Days last week, and something struck me as interesting. The Houston Cougars were tabbed as the media pick to win the conference. Now, I'm not saying that U of H is a bad team or is not deserving of it. I just don't know if they're as deserving as two other teams that were in that top three, Cincinnati and UCF. So I thought, why not kick off AAC week by examining these three programs heading into 2022. So first of all, I mean, we all know what Cincy has done with Luke Fickell. Ever since taking the job in 2017, they got things going in the right direction, and the last 4 seasons, they've had 3 losses and a couple one-loss campaigns. Dude has done a great job coaching, done a very good job recruiting. So of those 3 programs, UC has recruited the best. Going back 4 years, the Bearcats finished 66th nationally, 41st, and then 242 rankings in national recruiting. That's better than both UCF and Houston, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, I know Ohio is a very fertile football locale, but when you compare it to the Sunshine State of Florida, where UCF is at, in Orlando, really the heart of Florida, and then Houston, Texas, in that big panhandled state of football, where football is life, pretty remarkable that Fickell has not only out-recruited those 2 programs, but done so by a pretty big margin. You look at the last 5 years, UCF is first among those 3 in terms of winning percentage, at least within the AAC conference, whereas Cincy is second and Houston is 4th. And even if you look at the last 3 years, Cincy is first, UCF is second, and then Houston is just 5th in the last 3 years in terms of win percentage, which, by the way, is the tenure of head coach Dana Holgorsen. You look at where they finished last year. In the postseason, Cincinnati, they lost by 21 points to an Alabama Crimson Tide team that was in the national title game. Arguments can be made that they maybe would have won the national title had they not suffered some key injuries, but still hats off to the Georgia Bulldogs. But then you look at UCF, they finished their season beating a Florida Gator team, which I know they started to unravel and they were without their head coach, but UCF still beat this Power 5 SEC school by 12 in the Gasparilla Bowl in Florida. And Houston beat an Auburn team, which you could also make the argument was starting to unravel a little bit last year. There were questions about their coaching staff. Players were starting to transfer out. And the Houston Cougars beat Auburn by only 4 in the Birmingham Bowl. You look at the head coaches. Gus Malzahn, very, very good as a home coach in his career, 57-12 overall, playing in his home stadium, 7-0 at UCF in his first campaign last year. Luke Fickell, also very good at home. Luke Fickell also pretty good against ranked teams. He's 6-9 going against top 25 teams, but he's never lost to a ranked team when his team has been ranked. He's never lost to a lower ranked team than his team is. So, in other words, when the UC Bearcats are ranked, they have not been upset by a lower ranked team. Houston, Dana Holgorsen, not so great versus the top 25. 11-26 in his career as a head coach, which of course was mostly at West Virginia. Just 1-3 versus the top 25 here in H-Town. You look at, let's compare their personnel. So on offense, we'll go position group, unit by unit. Quarterbacks, you got to give a slight nod to Houston because they've got Clayton Tune, and I think that's a big reason why a lot of people are pegging the Cougars to possibly win the AAC, because Clayton Tune was the winner of the Manning Academy competition and camp and all those analytics and metrics that they used within competitions, within measurables. Toon was the guy, and that's a very prestigious honor to win, but you got to have a cast around you, and he does. But the big question mark on Houston's offense is going to be at O-line, where they only have 2 guys returning, and we'll get more in depth with the specific personnel for these 3 teams with our walk-it-offs this week. So I'm going to give the quarterback nod to UH, but a very close second, I think, is UCF. Not only do they have Mikey Keene, who was their quarterback the majority of last year after Dylan Gabriel went down with a collarbone injury, but they also get John Rice Plumlee, who was a 4-star recruit at Ole Miss, never had a chance to showcase his abilities at quarterback. It was mainly as a wide receiver or as an athlete, playing behind a very talented Matt Corral, who was a 2nd-round draft pick in the NFL. But he comes over and is basically the prototype Gus Malzahn quarterback. Very athletic, with a good arm, sharp, heady, good leader, a lot of energy. Not going to say that he is equal to the national championship quarterbacks that Malzahn has had, or the record-breaking quarterbacks that he's had, but he's a little bit of that, and he's also a little bit of Mackenzie Milton, in my opinion, my humble opinion. And the word is that he came in this spring and was just lighting things on fire. So I really like those 2 quarterbacks there, whoever ultimately wins the job, and I wouldn't be surprised if Malzahn kind of plays a little of both. So let's go to running back. I think that goes to UCF. Isaiah Bowser, Johnny Richardson, good 1-2 punch. And, you know, like we said, with Malzahn, he knows how to get the ground game going. They, you know, the receivers that UCF has, I think that's also an advantage that they have over those other 2 programs. So UCF has better running back room, better receivers. And who am I talking about? Well, you start with Ryan O'Keefe. He was the bowl game MVP last year, had 80-some catches, but he's lightning quick. He's also very skilled in the return game. They get Kobe Hudson coming over as a transfer from Auburn this year, not to mention Kamari Gamble, who was a tight end at the University of Florida. Big body, good guy down in the red zone. And let's not forget Alec Haller as well, who does great things at the other tight end spot. They've got 2 good ones there in Orlando. So going with those 2 groups, running back and receiver, going to UCF. Offensive line, no doubt, it's not even close. UC has the best offensive line, 5 returning starters. 3 of them were all AAC last year in Renfro, Metz, and O'Quinn. Those guys are going to be physical. So when you're looking at overall offense, UCF is going to have the most explosive offense. They will probably have the highest points per game total of these 3 teams. Yes, even more than Houston. And Cincinnati will certainly have the most physical offense. So whatever your poison is, I'm still giving that to UCF and Cincinnati respectively in terms of explosion and physicality, not Houston. So on the offensive side, Houston's got Clayton Tune, and they've got a good cast of receivers, but I don't think that they're better than overall what UCF will have, and more so the way that UCF will employ their receivers and their running backs within that system. And I know some of you may be thinking, well, what about Houston's Alton McCaskill? Well, he got hurt in the spring at running back. So if he returns and he's healthy by the time AAC play comes around, then look out, Houston just got a lot better. But beyond him, no disrespect to Tajon Henry or Brandon Campbell, but they're not Alton McCaskill. And again, I have questions about that offensive line for Houston, which returns only 2 starters from last year's group, which wasn't that great to begin with. On the defensive side, rather than go the 3 position groups, D-line, linebackers, and secondary, I'm going to kind of lump it into front 6 and back 6 or back 7, however you want to count that, because Houston employs a 4-2-5 defense. Cincy goes with a 3-3-5, and then UCF also runs that 4-2-5. So in terms of overall D-line, it goes to Houston. They've got some names there. They've got production. A lot of that Sac Avenue returns from a season ago, but don't look too far past UCF. They actually had more total sacks last year in conference, 28 to be exact, than Houston did. Houston had 25. Cincinnati had 23. So UCF had the most sacks on quarterbacks a year ago, and so they're a very close second behind Houston's D-line. I think UCF has the best overall front six when you combine their D-line and linebackers. The linebacking core, Cincy has the best group, with not only Deshaun Pace returning, but he gets his brother Ivan transferring in from Miami of Ohio. And then you add in Ty Van Fossen and Wilson Huber. Those are four really good linebackers, and they're really only going to play three on the field at the same time, but they'll have a great rotation. But you look at UCF, Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste, and then the big wild cards are Terrence Lewis, who was a top 3 linebacker recruit who committed to Maryland, really didn't play at all there, put himself in the portal. He ends up at UCF. And then you also get Brandon Jennings, who did play as a true freshman last year. He was a top 20 linebacker recruit nationally, decided that he didn't want to stay in College Park, Maryland. He comes with Lewis, and the two of them should get a lot of PT this year in Orlando for the Knights. In the secondary, I'm going to give that to UCF. They have 5 players returning in that secondary that totaled 35 pass breakups. So with the 5 guys I'm talking about, Quadric Bullard, Devad Wilson, Devontae Brown, Corey Thornton, Justin Hodges as well, those 5 totaled 35 pass breakups, which averages 7 per player. Then you throw in Jarvis Ware, who was at Missouri 2 years ago, had a pretty good season, redshirted last year at UCF. He should be a starting free safety for him this year. They also bring in Kobe Perry from Austin Peay, who was the Defensive Player of the Year in FCS football a season ago. So those 7 guys playing amidst 5 DB spots in that lineup, good rotation, good depth, and they proved to be respectable against the pass a year ago. But then you throw that in with the havoc that they have up front with those sack numbers from guys like John Seliskar, Tremont Morris Brash, Landon Woodson, Ricky Barber, Anthony Montalvo. The front end and the back end working together like that, I think that's going to be a recipe for success. So if you haven't picked it up yet, I'm actually picking UCF to win the AAC this year. So why is that? Well, let's look at schedule, okay? UCF, they get SMU at home, who I think will be either the 4th or 5th best team in that league this year, behind the 3 that we just talked about. But UCF gets them at home, and they get them in the AAC opener. So new coach Rhett Lashley, I think, can do some good things there. But in the conference opener, and that psychological advantage that UCF has, that Gus Malzahn, his mentor, his longtime friend, his high school coach, when you're going against your head coach, take it from me, I know from experience coaching against my mentor, my high school head coach, there's that psychological edge that they've got over you, at least in the beginning. And I think that Malzahn's got that over Lashley in this first year. And then they don't have to play Houston. UCF doesn't have to play Houston. And they get Cincinnati at home, where they are 2-3 against them in the last 5 years, but 2 of those 3 losses were by 3 points. So they've played Cincinnati very close. And I think, again, getting them in the bounce house this year, and I know it's been renamed, but I'm still going to call it the bounce house, UCF hosting the Bearcats at home, I think that's going to be the edge. I'm picking UCF to win that game, and that will be the tiebreaker, because the next week they have to go and play Memphis, but UCF has owned Memphis. I think they're like 12-2 in the last 14 meetings, and even if they lose that Memphis game, they can afford to, because they'll have that head-to-head tiebreaker against UC. I don't see UC losing any more conference games outside of UCF, but losing that game to UCF, and with UCF only having 1 conference loss, in my opinion, that'll give them the tiebreaker head-to-head. And I know people look at Houston's schedule and say, well, they don't have to play Cincinnati or UCF. That might be to their detriment. So their schedule starts out top-heavy, where they have to go on the road to UTSA, which is not going to be an easy place to win. They have to go on the road to Lubbock, Texas, and take on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, a team that they've lost to, I think, 3 straight seasons. And I know Texas Tech's got a new head coach coming in. That's a game that Houston could win, but it's not going to be easy. And then their conference schedule is pretty soft, pretty easy, pretty manageable until the last month of the season when they have to play on the road at SMU, an SMU team that should be developed by that point, and they should have that Rhett Lashley offense humming with Tanner Mordecai and Rashee Rice and the weapons that they've got around there. And then also they have to play at East Carolina 2 weeks later. Now they've beaten ECU 3 straight times, but last year in H-Town, the Cougars won by a touchdown in overtime. So that's one that I think Coach Houston, ironically enough, is circling for the ECU Pirates, and that's a game that they will probably need to win in order to secure some pretty good bowl eligibility there. So I'm not necessarily calling for losses, but I don't see Houston with any fewer than 2 losses this year, even though they don't play those other top 2 teams. So that's how I see it. I think UCF, you can make a lot more claims that they should have at least been picked higher than Houston with all the things that they've got, with all the advantages, with the fact that UCF has, I think in my opinion, better coaching than Houston does. And again, that's not to disrespect the Houston team or the players or their coaching staff, but if I'm stacking them up one-on-one, I'm more worried about Gus's team than I am Dana's team. So what do you guys think? Houston fans, I know that you want to curse me out right now. UCF fans, you better have my back. And UC fans, again, I'm not slighting your Bearcats and Coach Fickle. They're the class of the AAC right now. And until that's taken away, and until they're kind of buried below the 3rd or 4th spot in the conference, they will still be seen as AAC Titans. But UCF, I think this is a year that they should be able to get that done, knock them off, and we could be looking at a UCF night team that could flirt with an 11-1, possibly an undefeated 12-0 season if they handle everything that they need to. They've got a tough non-conference game against Louisville in their 2nd game of the season, September 9th, but that's in Orlando. So if they get that one and take back the game that they should have won at Cardinal Stadium a year ago, I think that that could be something very important for this program, this team, and it could be UCF that's that group of 5 darling that we're talking about in December, and not Cincinnati, not Houston, not any team from the Mountain West, or even the Sun Belt, or maybe a Liberty that some people are throwing out there. So what do you guys think about that? Hit me up on Twitter. Thanks for following, share, subscribe, and spread the word. I'm Chappy. This is what I know. It's great to be back.